I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Oh, I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for the work you do too.
Selene, you're a host of a podcast. You're actually really part of a movement, in my opinion, behind that sort of branding of feisty menopause. You've written books. You've got a new book that's out. I would love if you could share with us how you got to this place through your journey as an athlete and as an advocate for women and people in menopause to this point where I really see you as like someone who's changing the face of menopause. How did you get here through your career and through your experiences?
I appreciate all of that. I appreciate every word you just said, because I do view it more of a movement, and I view it as trying to create an empowering culture. That's what we do. All the feisty brands do, and that's certainly what Feisty Menopause is trying to do. Is it's one thing to try to like empower you, right, as a singular person, but without a culture that supports you. And so it's still an uphill battle, right? So we're always trying to like create this empowering culture around women as well. And, I never in a billion years thought I would be doing a podcast on menopause, that is hit play, not pause. I started just as a writer. I was a science writer, and then I got hired by Rodale Press, and they do men's health, women's health, prevention, bicycling, all of the magazines, Runner's World, recently bought by Hearst, but all those titles still exist. And I just fell into this marvelous life of writing about health and fitness, things I was passionate about. I had always ridden a bike, but I didn't actually know that I was fast on a bike. I didn't know I had any talent. And I started riding with the people at bicycling. They did lunch rides, and they would say, you should consider racing. And I didn't even know that was a thing. And they prodded me enough, and I lined up for some races, and I won some races. And it just launched me on this amazing career that included, Ironman Kona and mountain bike stage races in South Africa and Cuba and Israel and Brazil and like all over the world. So it was, and at the time, I mean, I think the important part leading into answering this last piece is I didn't really kick off any of those athletic endeavors until I was like 39. I mean, I just did a lot of fun things, and I won my regional races, but I did really well at Ironman when I was 39. I went to Kona, and then I got picked up by a mountain bike racing team. It was a women's team. And that just, I didn't know I was too old to be doing any of that stuff, so I just did it. And when I got to about, my mid 46, 47, I started having definitely night sweats, a lot of anxiety, waking up at 2 a.m., just thinking the world was ending, and not putting, because I didn't know anxiety was a quote unquote symptom of menopause. I didn't know any of that. Like all I knew was hot flashes and your period ends. Like, so a lot of what I was going through, I had no idea that was hormonal. It was hormone changes. And it wasn't until I was, knocking on the door of 50 that I was like, oh, okay. Like now I know what all this was. And I definitely at that point was experiencing changes, in muscle and in power and all kinds of things that were just getting in the way of performing my sport. And I thought, okay, this is problematic on a couple levels. One, personally, and two, because I have co-authored a book called Roar with Dr. Stacy Sims, and she does women's specific physiology and training. She's sort of a thought leader and a science leader in that space. And we were working on a new book that is out now called Next Level for menopausal women. And I thought, if I am a mess, I can't authentically write this book. I mean, I'm giving this advice. So I panic called her, and she's like, calm down. And, we talked about changing my training according to what my hormones were doing and what the state of my physiology was now. And I started lifting heavier and doing a lot of the things that are in the book, and it worked. Like it didn't, obviously it didn't make me 45 again, or 42 again, but it made me my best 50-year-old self, and I won another race that year. So it was a really great arc. And along that path, she works with a company who does my podcast called Feisty Media, right? And they had approached me asking if I wanted to do a webinar. And I said, you guys should really do a podcast. And they said, do you want to do it? And without a thought, I just said yes, because I thought, if I don't know these things, and if I felt so lost and confused and scared and just wanted to disappear from the starting lines, I know I'm not alone, because I can look across the starting lines and I don't see many of the women I used to race with. Where did they go? So it just became a personal passion project, if you will. And I was plugged in with all the right people to just make this movement grow.
I love it. It's interesting because you've taken like a, maybe a slightly different path. It's funny when you started to talk about your experience as an athlete, I was like, oh, I want to ask her about like how much her athlete mentality has influenced your drive, your passion. But also you just sort of admitted that you didn't even know you were good at your sport,
Right.
until you were, in your 30s, which I think is a different path than lots of like youth athletes
Definitely.
would take, right? Where it's for them, that transition into 40 is like so starkingly like obvious because they have trained in like their youthful body for like their whole life. And then when they see their numbers going down or their race times going down or whatnot, if you like, they can see that obvious change. Whereas for you, like starting as a later in your career as an athlete, I don't know, how much did that influence like the way you felt about how your hormones were impacting it?
Yeah, I mean, I just didn't. And to be clear, I mean, I just also might be genetically inclined to like, and I think women, and especially in endurance sports, they can sail longer into their careers. I mean, it's you have a longer trajectory in endurance sports as a woman. You've got women in their 40s beating men outright in ultra endurance races, right? I mean, you have the woman who won Race Across America last year outright is 52. So there's a lot of things that women can do in the endurance space well throughout those hormonal changes. So I didn't really think about it. I mean, I've always been athletic. I played field hockey in school. I got a scholarship. I did all that stuff, but I never really considered myself. I didn't put that label on myself because I just never thought of myself that way. I am very goal oriented, and I do have passions, and I'm driven by those passions. So I think that's just all a product of me. I approached my writing. I wrote for Bicycling Magazine for 26 years. I still write for Bicycling Magazine. So I've always been able to meld my life together in this. What I do athletically is also what I do in the microphone and what I do when I write. So it's all just one big journey that just keeps evolving as I evolve.
And so I'm it's interesting because your experience there with that, like I call it like that retrospective look at your mid 40s, where you're like, oh, that's what was going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a very common experience for people and women to maybe in those moments not recognize what's happening to them hormonally and only after the fact. And I think that's one of the challenges we've had with this menopause versus perimenopause diagnosis experience is that like it's such a retrospective thing where we're like, oh yeah, your last 3 years, Leah, that's why, right? Like that's why you
Right.
felt like this. So even like as like an educated person and a person working in that space, it wasn't completely obvious to you. It's not like your hormones like knocked on the door and said, oh, by the way, like we're changing now. Like in those moments when you didn't feel well or didn't feel like yourself, like what was that inner dialogue? I'm curious.
Well, it's funny because I've always been a pro level catastrophic thinker. So I just thought, wow, I maybe life is getting to me. I mean, like that is really sort of what I was thinking. I have a teenage daughter, all the things, your parents are getting like all the stuff that comes up, and I'm training super hard, and I'm still training, 18 hours a week. So if I'm waking up sweating, I'm not like sometimes that happens when you train a lot too. You can think maybe I'm overtraining, maybe there's all kinds of things. Had I known, even if I had learned, because even though I had written about menopause peripherally throughout my career, like it really was always through the lens of, oh, you get a belly and oh, you get hot flashes. And that was like the limited understanding. So it's great for me to be watching people, in the Hit Play Not Pause groups. I see them in the social channels and they direct message me saying that it's they are so happy just to know what's going on. I've heard that over and over and over again, that it was just, even if they are still experiencing all the symptoms, they're less distressing to them because they understand them. And that makes 100% sense, right? And I even if I don't know if I would have done anything radically different, but at least if I had known, it would have like calmed me down a little bit. Just having that knowledge would have sort of brought down the anxiety that I was feeling about the anxiety. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think even we're starting to see the research on what we call it, if we want to call it self-compassion,
Yeah.
or some of those pieces around like how women feel about their aging and changing bodies and changing hormones, that even just that acceptance or understanding is changing how women's symptom experience is.
Experience it 100%.
Yeah.
That literature is there. It's very interesting. And it makes sense. I mean, it's a self-feeding mechanism at some point, right? I mean, you have a little control of that dial. And if you don't understand and you're anxious and you're like you can ramp that up. And you can also, I did yoga before this podcast, you can always bring it down, right? You can always just like, you have some control of that dial.
Yeah. But when women don't understand what's happening, right?
Totally. Then of course you're not going to even reach for the dial.
No.
Yeah.
And so I think, and it's part of one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you is about like, us trying to have that representation in the media, in conversations, in books, in, even the images I think that women are consuming right now online are not necessarily serving them when they're in their mid to late 40s, because they're not seeing themselves that well represented. They're watching the like super ripped 20-year-old CrossFitter do XYZ. They're watching the 20 something yogi do moves that are just not accessible to them any longer, in a body that is not accessible to them any longer. And I'm curious about, the detriment that that's maybe having, or the way that that's holding us back for women in their 40s. And I think that, what I'm watching you do and what I'm so excited about is changing that narrative and creating a space where women can see themselves reflected in media.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. And I think that if you look for it, you can find a universe that reflects you now. And people just go into your feed and clean. Fitspiration is often the opposite, right? On Instagram, and you can go and clean your feed and find all kinds of wonderful, active people who look just like you, who are still doing amazing things, but they're in your own experience, they're in your own life stage. And I do think that's important. And I think that's part of that culture piece I was talking about, that culture of empowerment. I mean, we now with these things have the power in our hands to create a culture in our phone, and you should create a culture in your phone that is empowering to you, because you stare at it an awful lot. And I think that is a huge piece of that. And that's why it was important to me to start some of the groups, that are online, like that private Hit Play Not Pause Facebook group, so people could come in and celebrate this time of life as it should be.
And what do you notice about those community members, like on day one when they enter that community versus like day 365? What's the evolution of that person who connects with your community? Can you see that, like, and how it's influencing and shaping their experience?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them will come in and just be glad they finally found a community, period. Right? Like that is the first step. And then it's really fascinating to watch. I mean, they learn from each other, and we all learn from each other. So, someone will come in and they will have something like full body aches, right? Which can happen in menopause. But again, that's not something anyone ever talks about. And then somebody comes in and said, I had that. And maybe they did go on menopause hormone therapy for a bit. And it's like, it cleared it up. And now I'm great. And they, so there's a lot of learning and lifting each other up in the community. And you definitely see evolution. I've seen people run their fastest 5K, which is amazing, or just run a 5K, or, walk into a CrossFit class. And every day I hear from people who say, I thought I was done and now I know I'm not. And that is amazing.
I love that. And I think too, like that normalization and you that's sort of like that ubiquity experience where it's like everyone's doing it, if we're all going through it, it's okay. Like the
Yep.
world is not on fire.
Yeah, yeah. And we're all here and there's light at the end of the tunnel. I mean, sometimes the worst period is that transition. And when you get to the other side, like things settle down and it does become better.
Yeah. And I think there's that a new conversation coming around the space in menopause that it isn't all doom and gloom and right. And I think when we see some
That
of
was
the
important to me.
yeah, I feel like when we see some of the like marketing and even I think I probably um when we're trying to explain to people what is happening, we often paint it in this ugly light, right? Because what we're trying to
Yeah.
do is say, okay, you're 47. I'm sorry you feel like shit, right?
Yeah.
There are options for you. But what we're not doing is a good enough job of reflecting all of the positive things that are coming from this stage of life.
Yes. Yes. And we talk a lot about stepping into your power, and like it is a very powerful time of life. There are things that 100% are challenging, but any transition has challenge. Any transition has challenge. And it is 100% that it is a transition. It is like a tunnel. Sometimes you can't see the light at the end, but it's not a cave that's dark with a bear inside that is just going to devour you and it's over. Like you just go through the tunnel and it changes you, and it can change you. I feel, I am not as fast on my bike, and that is something that I have mourned, if I'm honest, like, because it's a passage. It's something that, it was bound to happen at some point anyway. But I still feel really good on my bike. I can still have very good days on my bike, but I feel more whole as a person in many ways, because it sort of forced me to stop, assess what's important to me, what do I want to work on going forward. And it can be a really, really great time to just become the woman that you want to become if you let it be that process.
And and the total sidetrack question, like I think women always want to know like what that first step is actually to becoming the woman that they want to become. Like I know for you as an athlete, that's something that you embody. You probably don't even know like all the daily practices that you're doing every day to become that woman. But I think sometimes we imagine ourselves as being this like peaceful, silver-haired, woman in her organic cotton dress out in
We
her
don't have many
garden.
of them in my in my audience.
But like how we go from like the overworked, underslept,
Right.
not resilient, not compassionate 47-year-old to that beautiful 70-year-old woman who's at peace with the world. Like that's not a
Right.
single step, right?
Right. And I think the first, what I have seen in my own personal experience is that very first step is that stopping and assessing, which you don't often take time to do. You assess everyone else. Are my kids okay? Has everyone been fed? Has the dog been let out? Is the bed made, the laundry, the car? There's a vet appointment. I could go on and on and on, right? But women rarely stop and go, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing? Am I like, is this all going somewhere? And I think just that first step. And when you hit this transition and you are sort of being bombarded by symptoms, and many women are, it does sort of make you just like go, okay, like it's me time for a second here. And you take care of yourself. And it's just a time that you can stop and think. Like, and you stop giving an F about a lot of stuff. There's a lot of, you let go of a lot of things. And one of the things that I think that women let go of most often that is most empowering for them is what other people think of them. And that is huge, because we do spend an enormous part of our lives looking at ourselves as a movie of ourselves. Like, how is everyone else viewing me? How is that just dominates our mental space. And once you can just be like, like the empowerment is high.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love that. I feel like I'm missing that part of my brain that worries about what other people think, but I'm grateful for that.
Oh, that's good. No, it's good. You
I don't
don't
want
try
to
to
grow
acquire
it.
that.
No.
No.
Um, so one of the things I had asked you before we hit record was kind of around some of the risks of our community of perimenopausal and menopausal women sort of being like put under the spotlight
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
from like a commodification of menopause perspective. I see lots of positives coming from this, of course, right? I think we're on the same mission, we have the
mm-hmm.
same goals. But then the other side of that is that we're being marketed to in a way that we never have been before. I think we're seeing opportunity and suffering of this group of individuals. And, suddenly you can buy menopause tea and menopause sheets and menopause whatevers. I think there's a risk there that we're going to be preyed on. What are your thoughts?
We already are. And it's nothing that we can stop. Like we can't stop that outside because we live in a capitalist society. Like, so we can't stop. We went from being ignored to now there are so many of us, it's just the right generation. Like this is a generation of women. We're in the workforce. We're out there. We're doing things, like we're here. We have money. We have resources. We have voices. So we're seen now. Like now everyone sees us. Like great. And that was great. And it is great because we're going to get research and we're going to get things. But the unforeseen consequences of that are these predatory forces that are like, oh, I bet they don't like that belly they have now. How can we make them feel insecure about that and sell them this thing? And there's a lot of that going on. And even well-intended places, I feel like can have negative consequences. And we were talking before the show about the hormone therapy piece. Like in 2001, 2002, the Women's Health Initiative those studies came out and scared everybody off hormone therapy, right? And that lasted for a very long time. And then it started trickling out like, well, maybe that was overblown and, maybe this is useful. And it is very, very, very useful for many women. For some women, it can be a lifesaver to get hormone therapy. But the pendulum has rocked way over to this other side again, where I'm hearing people say, well, maybe menopause is just female hormone deficiency. I'm like, wait. No, like this is a natural physiological process. Please don't tell us that we're in a disease state for the rest of our lives, just because our ovarian hormones are changing. Like that's actually not true. And some women do brilliantly without hormones. And some women I've seen not do well on hormones. So it's really important that we don't, I think I'm very passionate about this right now because it's been coming into my space that there are very, very large multi-million-dollar funded companies now that are going to very soon start advertising this stuff to women, and they have celebrity funders, all kinds of backing. And it's going to make it like, well, everybody should take this because you're missing something if you're not. And it just concerns me. Like that piece really concerns me. I don't want women to feel less than, or now I feel like many in our audience are getting more confused. Like they felt like they had some clarity and now they're like, what if maybe I'm less, maybe I could be better if I took these hormones. It's like, it's creating this tension that we're going to have to deal with. We're going to have to figure it out.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because I think we create so many metaphors to describe things that sometimes will get us into a hot mess because, I think when we were under prescribing HRT, we tried to say, well, if you had a thyroid disease, like we would like give you, thyroid replacement like candy. Why are we withholding support and treatment when it's safe and efficacious and yada, yada, yada? And yet, so we use them, but that's like not the totally perfect metaphor, right? Because there isn't like a natural decline in thyroid hormone as we age that we can all manage and like it's
totally.
And yet
we don't all get diabetes and we don't all need insulin.
That's right.
But all women will go through
comparison
menopause.
A little bit, right?
Yeah.
And so I do like that language of moving away from like hormone replacement therapy to menopause hormone therapy.
Totally.
I think that's probably going to do some positive things for us, but knowing how we work in medicine, it'll be like 2037 before we adopt that as a whole. But what is the sweet spot? Like, how do we inform women about their options, but also not, create this cycle of that commodification and overselling?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. And it's one I've thought about an awful lot because it is important. It's everybody wants to be vital. Everybody wants to be healthy. And I think, obviously the education piece is huge, like knowing what happens when your hormones go through this fluctuation and decline and what symptoms may arise, how hormone therapy can ease that journey, you know, and you can or cannot be on it for a long time, depending on your circumstances. Like giving women the information they need, they can usually make intelligent decisions by themselves. And I think just having, like, I work with a menopause practitioner who, you know, I had a meeting with her and we just laid it all out. I'm like, this is what I do. This is who I am. This is my health history. This is how, you know, we did blood panels and all that. And my cardiovascular risk is good. You know, I mean, everything looks good and I feel good and I'm sleeping well. So what, I don't feel like I need to add something into that besides what I'm doing. Right. Um, but if I have, you know, I'm a long distance cyclist and the vaginal dryness, you know, that's kind of uncomfortable. So we added some, you know, I have Reverie and I had low dose estrogen and that has helped. Right. So like, it's just looking at yourself, where you are, where the hormones might help, where they may not, and just making intelligent decisions instead of this sort of broad brushes that we always want to whip out and be like, it's terrible or it's for everybody. You know, it's like having that very personalized discussion. And I realize that I am really fortunate to be able to have that. And how do we get that accessible to everybody, to every woman?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And how do we, you know, this is like a follow-up question, like, you know, HRT is not going to save the day, right? And sometimes I'll say to my patients, I'm like, yeah, your poor little cream doesn't stand a chance, right? Like against all the stress, all the overwork, all the underfueling, all the things that are going on with your lifestyle. I think if we position HRT as like this silver bullet, we're not doing that much better than we were with antidepressants or sleeping pills or all the other things that we're using to mask experience or numb experience. When like there's so much more that could be done there. And I think women are empowered enough. They want to know how to improve and change their health and life. If we distill it down to, oh, it's just a hormone deficiency, like here, take this, you'll be fine. We're really doing a huge disservice.
I couldn't agree more. And I see in the channels, again, it's interesting because I get, you know, there's 10,000 plus women in there. So I get to watch a lot of conversations. And, you know, there are not few that come in and say, I thought that this would do X, Y, Z, and I feel worse. You know, I have gained weight. There have been a couple who have come in like with suicidal thoughts from like, you know, progesterone intolerance. And that's not, you know, there was a woman that I was having a conversation with who's like, I think that these should be over the counter like supplements. And I was like, I don't, you know, like they have too much power. They're too, that does not sound like a good idea.
Oh, and I love that you have that relationship with someone to do that with, right? I think that's that key ingredient that maybe we actually need in women's healthcare, right? Is that person to say like, okay, unbiased, here's all the options, right? And when something is a prescription, we hope that it can maintain that level of neutrality where, you know, really shouldn't matter to your practitioner whether you do something or not, right? Like, it's just numbers. Like it increases your risk of this by X amount and decreases your risk of this.
And knowing what that really means, right? Yeah. Because I think that's where we sometimes get into trouble, especially when we talk about like the breast cancer, which is a whole industry in and of itself. You know, when you look at what the actual, like when it says, well, you're just going to increase your risk by blah, blah, blah. And then it's like, but that goes from 1 in 1,000 to 2 in 1,000. Like for someone to, and I'm not trying to minimize anything, but like really understanding, because when you can advertise pharmaceuticals in this country, and I have been a health writer for 30 years, you want to make things sound as big as they can. So, I mean, going from 1 to 2, that's twice, you know, but like, if you don't actually understand what the numbers were to begin with, then you're going to be so scared than if you have the actual information. And man, it is a battle to get the actual information out there. I will say that it really is.
Yeah. They're not the sexiest headlines, right? To be like,
no, they never are. They're not at all.
It's way better to say that something got doubled or tripled.
Way better.
Right. Like I love that when bacon was killing everybody in the news, right? Like bacon, like doubled your risk of colon cancer. And I'm like, yeah, but everyone's risk was like pretty low to begin with.
Right. Like, where did it start? Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Sunday morning brunch is still fine. Thanks. We're fine.
Um, well, I really appreciate being able to have this conversation with you, Selene. I have questions about your book because it's basically
Okay.
just been launched. I love Roar. I love
No,
Stacy
thank you.
Sims. I love all the things that you women are doing because it's giving a voice to my perimenopausal and menopausal female athletes. I always think I call myself like a recovered competitive athlete, right? And I've needed like something in my life to have that goal oriented driven. I just turned 40, so I have that like advantage of like I haven't seen my weight start to decrease in the gym, although I know that that is coming over the
What was your
next decade.
sport?
I was a competitive curler actually when I
Get
was
out of
growing
here.
up.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, you can probably curl forever. No, I mean, I'm an ignorant. I don't know much about, I'll say.
You know
Like
what?
maybe you can't get in that position. I don't know what you were doing. I don't know.
You know what? I just kind of missed my window of opportunity. That's how I would look at it, is that like between like babies and career and there was a point where I was curling like 30 weekends a year and had two babies and my poor husband like behind the glass with like these two kids and he was like finally like Jordan like you can't do all the things. You have to pick actually.
You can do all the things, just not at the same
Just not at the
time.
same time. So I retired from
Yeah.
curling and picked up CrossFit as my recovery program,
Oh, cool. Okay.
which then translated into I'm a very mediocre weightlifter and power lifter at this point in my
All right.
career, which is great and I love it. But what I really love is that like that discussion around lean tissue and building muscle in women and stopping that conversation about always trying to make bodies smaller. Um,
Oh, thank you.
right?
Thank you.
And you're
Mm-hmm.
giving that a
Thank you.
voice that I haven't had for my patients in the past, where, I'm one person going like, I promise you, if you put on 10 pounds of muscle, your life will change. And now I get to see that.
And it'll be so much better when you're older. It'll be so much better. So much better.
So, like the big messaging from this new book, like I just would love if you could give our listeners that please go buy this pitch and what you're trying to achieve with this second installment.
Yeah, you know what it is that we have always been about working with your physiology, right? Like, well, Roar was a lot about the menstrual cycle, a lot about the menstrual cycle and how to work with that to perform your best, no matter what your hormones were doing. And that's always sort of my tagline for everything. It's like, here's how to perform your best, no matter what your hormones are doing. And next level is just the next level of that. And some of the big messages, will resonate. It's like lift heavy shit. A lot of women have been afraid of lifting, but as those hormones sort of say goodbye, even if you are taking hormone therapy, it's not creating your premenopausal state. And it's really important that women know that. So, it is harder for you to maintain that muscle and that bone. So what the book really is a roadmap into how to pick up where those hormones have left off. If that's the best way I can describe it, and just giving, training and nutrition advice that will help you be and perform your best in your new hormonal state of perimenopause or menopause.
I love that. And I think that's such an important conversation because that loss of muscle tissue for women it's like I don't know if there is a bigger predictor of their long-term health and risk and
There isn't.
independence, right? I'm like, if you're imagining yourself as that 7-year-old woman on your own property digging your garden,
Yeah.
like that's not something that we just arrive at gracefully without putting in the time like for muscle maintenance in fourth, fifth, sixth decade.
It's huge. It's huge. And we, especially this generation, unfortunately came up at a time when it was all about long, lean tone, so lift like that 5-pound dumbbell 35 time kind of thing. And that's okay. There's that will perform a service, but you really need that strong central nervous stimulation. You need to like hit the satellite cells that and all that stuff to get the muscle stem cells. And that takes a bigger stimulation than that repetitive. I mean, you need to lift heavier, and lifting heavier actually can make you stronger without making you quote unquote bulky, which women are still so afraid of, right? Like it's not about hypertrophy. It's about getting all your muscle fibers as awake and online as you can, and keeping that muscle tissue and keeping it active. It's really important. I mean, we're on the same page here, but I can't say enough about it. And it helps your mobility. It helps keep those aches and pains away. It helps keep your joint integrity. It helps keep your muscles. It's good for your brain, and you're independent. Like you said, I mean, even when women start to get, into their, I read some study, it was years ago, like after 50, how many women couldn't open a jar, and it was depressing. I mean, when you look at grip strength, that correlates with independence and longevity, that alone, and nothing helps your grip more than like kettlebell swings and, lifting a barbell.
No, I don't know if I think I'm going to call it fortunate that I was never going to be that long and lean person, no matter how light that dumbbell was. Right. I'm sat like, oh, that dumbbell's 1.5 pounds. Okay. Now I'm huge. Which is just my genetics. But I really want women to like understand that this is how, like, this is really the way forward from a health perspective. So I'm grateful that you have put out a resource that I know I can trust and help women turn to, that's going to give them that empowered look at their bodies and their exercise and what is possible for them. If you were going to write one more chapter for that book, what would it be? Selene, like, what would you, if is there anything in it that if you're like, if I had one more thing to say, this is what it would be?
Yeah, I mean, I'm so close to it. It's hard for me to say that, but I think that the piece that I would really put in there is live forward. Live, like, that is like so many women, especially in this active demographic, and you were kind of dancing around that earlier. There's this tendency to sort of look back at what you were able to do, and like spend too much time looking in the rear view mirror when you've still got this whole great life right ahead of you, and like to look forward to it. And I would probably end the book with that. Like, this is about like eyes forward, life forward. Like, there's so many things ahead of you that you have yet to accomplish, and goals that you can set. And there's no reason that you can't do those things.
I love that. How can our listeners find you? Find your book, find your podcast. You do a lot of things, Selene. We'll put the links to everything. We'll put the links in the show notes, but where's the best place for them to start?
feistymenopause.com is a one-stop shop for all those things. So I would send people there.
Okay. Awesome. And they can get your book from there.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for spending time with me today. I love these conversations. I like amplifying the voices of strong women. I think that this is really what it's all about. This is our purpose behind the podcast, is to give people access to accurate, empowered information so that they can help change their health. I'm so grateful for you and all of the work you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. It was really a pleasure speaking to you.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. My goal is to help you feel more confident about your health. Please remember that what we talked about today in the podcast does not constitute medical advice, nor was a doctor-patient relationship formed. If you have questions about your healthcare or about how today's topic pertains to you, please take it up with your family doctor, your specialist, or someone on your health team.